There are 38 pupils in Amaranth. 22 to 23 identify as trans. The remainder identify as cis. And they are generally the friends and family of the trans children here.
A school specifically set up to cater to the needs of so-called transgender children. On the one hand, I suppose, is probably a better solution, if you ask me, because I would prefer children that were supposedly confused about their quote-unquote gender identity were separated from the rest of the class or the rest of society and put to a school such as this, so that the rest of the children didn't have to learn about the diverse gender spectrum and the multitude of gender identities out there. And that goes for the so-called term cisgender as well as all the rest. But on the other hand, one does have to wonder, in a school that's predominantly full of transgenders, quote-unquote, how many of those children actually are what would be considered transgender? How many of them actually are what would be deemed transgender by a medical physician or so-called gender identity expert? And how many of these children are in actuality just under the illusion that they are a so-called transgender? Because, again, as with every single time something like this crops up, whether it just be the latest articles about a transgender child or in this case a school, it seems to me that it's an occurrence that's steadily increasing since they've taken what it means to be a transgender and normalised it to a point where it's as simple as proclaiming to be gay or proclaiming to be straight. I'm gay, I'm straight, I'm trans. It's not the case at all. And it seems that it was an integral way of making it as normalised as it has become and as easy to understand for children. They had to make sure that the term cisgender was normalised along with it. So you're either cisgender or trans, as if they're one and the same, when the reality of the matter is they're not one and the same, regardless of how you wish to view transgenders and gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder. One thing is abundantly clear, and it is not the opposite of cisgender, because for one, cisgender doesn't exist.
Hi! They've done a number of these studies on transgender children, and in those studies they say that a lot of the time, the majority of the time, gender identity of what children feel in pre-puberty or during puberty might not be what they feel in 10, 20 years' time.
Well, we don't really care about that here at school. Here at school, the kids are who they want to be now. Y que nosotros educamos desde...
Kids in every single school are able to be who they want to be without having to have a label slapped on the school that deems the school a transgender friendly environment, or going so far as to say the school is a transgender school. The fact of the matter is that, again, you take in the term transgenderism and in your attempts to normalise it and turn it into something which is not, you're just taking buzzwords and cliche sentences and meanings and throwing them about the place as a means to convince the people that are listening. It's not a case of a transgender school allowing children to just be themselves, when every other school worldwide in the West anyway allows children to be themselves without having to question whether or not they're a fucking non-binary or a cisgender, quote unquote, without having to be taught about the gender spectrum.
De las personas y sus emociones, y eso toma tiempo. Now. Y que nosotros educamos desde las personas y sus emociones. Y eso toma tiempo. Toma tiempo que los niños aprendan que acá se puede jugar, se puede reír, se puede rayar las manos, pero además también vengo a aprender.
What do you think it means to be a trans child? What does transgender mean to you as a word?
Es como cuando eres trans puedes ser más libre. It's just like a normal.
As it seems to me that this is another example of an environment where children believe to be transgender and that belief has been reinforced. The very concept of telling children that being a transgender simply means being free, a freer version of yourself, to be yourself, and words to that effect. That's not what it means at all. So, in your attempts to convince children or allow children to choose to be a transgender or not, you have to redefine what it means. So, the definitions have completely changed, the goalposts have been shifted, but the name remains the same.
Nothing, it's just being myself.
Es ser tú mismo y
How many of these children at that age, they might very well believe they're transgender, but remove them from an environment where they are allowed to live their life as the opposite sex and they're not having that belief reinforced by every aspect of society. How many of them do you think would probably come out the other side of that, acknowledging that what they were experiencing and what they believed when they were a child was in fact a delusion, or at the very least was something that they don't believe now as an adult or the latter years of adolescence? I'm more inclined to believe that this is more likely to create an environment where children are less likely to come out the other side of it, acknowledging any of the aforementioned, and instead this reinforces the belief to a point where the likelihood is more and more children are going to enter adult life convinced. You know?
Sometimes the children doesn't know. They just
Well, they don't know. Maybe that's because they're children. They don't really need to be thinking about gender identity and or identities. They don't really need to be thinking about whether or not they're a transgender or a quote-unquote cisgender. Because let's pretend for 1 second that the term transgender was still heavily stigmatized as a mental illness. And then repeat this sort of scenario. It wouldn't sound the same or even look the same. For children to self-declare to be mentally ill? Nah. It just wouldn't wash. People would immediately think there was something not quite right about children all up and down the country, worldwide, en masse to an extent, self-declaring to be mentally ill. But you remove the label, you remove the stigma, and you normalise it. And all of a sudden children worldwide are self-declaring to be transgender or something completely different to their quote-unquote assigned sex at birth. And that's seen as normal. That's just met with, it's just treated as an everyday part of life. Some children are trans, some children ain't. It's very strange.